Hi there. Thank you for asking me to offer some pointers in relation to language, autism and students you may be teaching. I speak from a speech and language therapy perspective. Mary Caulfield is my name. And my background is working very much in an interdisciplinary context. I've worked for many years with teachers and in schools. And it is in this collaboration that's important, the working together between the family, the therapists, the team and the educator, be it the teacher or the SNA. I'm interested to take a relationship perspective in relation to this podcast and to consider what I say about communication, language, learning and best practice with reference to this relationship, which we build with the person. And first and foremost, how we develop and nurture the relationship will really have a profound impact on learning and communication. Our relationship will be with the autistic person as well as those significant people in their lives, like their parents, for example, or members of the team around the student. I'm aware how a good relationship with a teacher can really influence so much learning in school. So sharing a relationship demands that we explore how the autistic student understands the world, how their language is used to communicate with us, how we engage in meaning making to understand their perspective, their needs and their goals. I will refer to some websites and books, and one of these is an Irish website, asiam.ie. It's a national autism charity in Ireland, and their purpose is to educate, empower and advocate for the autism community, and they lead from the bottom up. They really help us to understand autism more and to understand the community's needs from their perspective. Another website which is helpful is interactingwithautism.com, which has a lovely section in it, Voices from the Spectrum. And that section really helps us to understand the lived experience of people with autism. So that's asiam.ie and the other website, interactingwithautism.com. ASIAM have a policy of using identity-first language when referring to individuals on the spectrum as autistic, and they report that many autistic people see their condition as a positive part of their personal identity, not as a disability. Two books which you may find useful also. One is called Uniquely Human by Dr. Barry Prezant, and another is Engaging Autism by Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider. Each book explores many areas of autism and the unique perspective of being autistic. So when we're working with students, it's really important to begin with the consideration of the student's strengths. Because autism can be described as a spectrum, it means it impacts different people in different ways and to different degrees. So what's really important is to know that each has individual differences and individual needs. And this is really relevant when it comes to communication and language. So one of the strengths we see is that the student, for example, might have powerful interests. They might be really focused and very interested in a particular lifelong passion. So, for example, Greta Thunberg, who's been reported to have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, has a lifelong passion around climate change. Dara McAnulty is a writer from Northern Ireland. He has written a book about his life and his connection with wildlife. It's called Diary of a Young Naturalist. And he referred to in Twitter at the time of the publication of his book in 2020, with a quote saying, "I'm an autistic teenager. I'm not polished. I don't rehearse. Sometimes I wish I did. I'm raw and real and very, very imperfect. But look what can happen to an ordinary boy who has a story to tell in all its rage and love." And he's written this wonderful book. And this again is embracing the passions of the person. So as a teacher, it's important to consider, what is the student's passion? It may take a while, or you may know quite quickly what the passion is, what the student's preferences are. And what we can do is weave these preferences into our teaching. For example, I've used such passions to support vocabulary development, expressive language, or the student's development of narrative. I've also used their particular passions in literacy development, reading comprehension, reading acuity, and writing. The student's motivation to engage in goals is much more successful when we're embracing their particular interest. And other strengths that you may note can be great attention to detail, having a very strong memory, great visual attention and visual strengths, and enjoyment of routines and structure. So do check for any assessment or speech and language therapy report, as these will provide you with important information about the student's communication strengths and language profile. Also, what you might find in reports are learning about what's the best method of communication for the student, what are their levels of need, what are the best goals for them at this time. And again, liaison and multidisciplinary work is very important. We're a member of the village. We're a member of, it takes a team around the autistic student. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone if you need to speak, for example, with a speech and language therapist or an occupational therapist. As a teacher, the liaison between the educator and the therapeutic team is really important. So we need to remind ourselves that the main areas of autism which are important to consider when we're working and teaching the autistic student include social interaction, communication, behaviour, and sensory processing. You will already have tools and expertise as a teacher in areas of language and literacy, and the tips I'm going to offer you now will serve to complement them. So one of the things that I'm interested in is considering the social emotional developmental levels. These were developed by Dr. Greenspan, and they serve really as a holistic way of looking at the student and how we can embed goals according to the developmental level that the person may be functioning with. And they're cumulative, so we all weave in and out of these levels all the time. First of these levels to consider is regulation and shared attention. We need to be regulated and calm in ourselves when we are learning and when we are communicating. And when regulated, we can co-regulate then with our partner in communication. This demands that we get to know the autistic student's sensory processing profile and their sensory preferences. An OT or your own knowledge will inform this. Knowing the student's sensory profile helps us to support their regulation and attention. And having sensory strategies, these will really support learning and communication. Have a look at the website Zones of Regulation by Leah Coopers. It has many resources and webinar opportunities to support this and to learn more about sensory processing and how to support with strategies the student's learning. Knowing what helps the student attend can really benefit the teaching and the learning. So for example, a student may need movement breaks to help sustain attention, or gentle music may support, Perhaps a break for a snack or having a water bottle at hand can all support, or even something like holding and fiddling with a fidget in their hands can actually develop the person's attention. Another developmental level that we want to consider when we're regulated and co-regulated is being available for warm shared engagement. And this is our aim. When the student is regulated, it's all the more possible. So including the interests and preferences of the autistic student will support shared engagement. And as a teacher with regular contact, you are in a very important role in getting to know the student. Offering a relationship of trust is crucial to set the tone for later learning and communication development. Two more levels on that social emotional trajectory are social reciprocity and social problem solving. So when we're sharing engagement, then we're open to back and forth communication. I speak, you listen. You speak, and I listen. And we share this back and forth gesturing, expressions, words, sentences. And these levels can all be engaged in at a pre-verbal level, meaning that we use body language, our hands to communicate, our whole bodies, facial expression, gestures, sounds. And these they can impart important communication messages in a back and forth conversation. So we're exchanging meanings together. These are really important foundations for language development. And sharing language then is at a higher level when we start to use vocabulary, we use our language comprehension to understand the other, we use words, phrases, sentences. It's important that language is used to communicate meaningfully and not by rote or without meaning. Sometimes an autistic individual may use words or full sentences, however may not be fully socially engaged. And our aim is for good, rich social communication. As much as we're teaching and developing the students' language and communication, we must also be equally mindful of our own language and communication. It's a two-way process, and we're a communication partner. So our aim is to offer what we call a communication environment, which will enhance our partner's highest potential. And I'll refer to this at the end, the good strategies that we can use to enhance a rich communication environment. I'll outline below now some well-known strategies and programs that support communication and language. And we often think of approaches to enhancing language and communication abilities along a continuum where we have traditional structured language teaching on the one hand, behavioural approaches for example, and on the other hand we have developmental social pragmatic approaches. Teach, this is TEACCH, is a structured intervention frequently used in classrooms. It stands for the treatment and education of autistic and related communication handicaps. Again, you'll see a lot about this online. And what Teach does is it supports the person's capacity for learning by physically organising the space, creating individualised schedules for the autistic student, creating work and activity systems and using lots of visual structure of the materials for the tasks and the activities, so that there's a structure and a routine and a preparedness that helps support the autistic student to know what's expected and how to progress in the actual learning and the activity. Another model which is often used a lot by speech and language therapists and embedded in school curriculums is the SERTS model. That's SCERTS. And that stands for social, communication, emotional regulation, and transactional supports. Carol Gray developed what are called social stories. Again, you'll see lots online in relation to this. Using social stories can be very helpful in relation to teaching the autistic student. The goal of the social story is to share information meaningfully and safely. And in relation to situations where the autistic student finds themselves in new situations they need to learn about in school, in the classroom, during breaks, we can develop a social story that's very personal and meaningful to the student. And it can be developed together. So do have a look on Social Stories website with Carol Gray. And one of the very important parts to support learning is the use of visual supports and tools. So complementing what we do in the classroom by having lots of visuals, lots of, be they, for example, a schedule of what we are going to do in the day, or a schedule of what this activity looks like. So why are visual tools important? Well, they establish attention, they give information, they explain social situations. We can create a little picture sequence of a social situation, or if the student has literacy in terms of reading capacity, we can write the sequence. Visual tools helps us to give students choices, give us structure to the day, and it really helps to teach routines if there are multiple steps in the routine. Visual tools can also support transitions. So this is where there's a movement from one class to the next, or from one building to the next. It can really help a student stay on task and ignore distractions. And visual tools help them to manage their time. So for example, there's a thing called a time timer, which is a visual timer. And we can actually put 5-10 minutes on the time timer where the student can see the minutes disappearing and knows, okay, when my 5 minutes is up, it's then break time, or it's time to switch to the next topic or activity. Visual tools can really support communication rules and can guide self-management. So they can really, we could have, for example, 4 pictures of items that the student needs to get ready for lunch or for going swimming. And these can be in the form of visual pictures so that they can self-manage what it is they need. Or they could have these written down on a checklist and tick them off as they go along. But much more supportive to them to have them visually than telling them which is the auditory route. Visual tools can really assist memory and can really support language retrieval. So this is where they are trying to remember something, but they see the visual, they see the word, or they see the picture, and that really, really supports them. They also support learning vocabulary, communicating emotions, and reviewing and remembering things. And this has come from Linda Hodgkin, who has developed a wonderful website, usevisualstrategies.com. usevisualstrategies.com, which gives many strategies and support to us in terms of how best to support the autistic student. So to recap, we might use visual tools such as pictures. Sometimes we may use objects. We may use a picture exchange communication system with the student. That's known as PECS. We may use, like I say, a visual schedule of all of the subjects for the day, or within one subject of all the activities within that subject. We may use a visual which is called a first then visual, whereby they know, for example, that there will be a break, and first we'll do our writing, we'll have a picture of writing, then we'll have a break. We might also use a visual tool such as a choice board, whereby we have a choice of 2 or 3 or 5 options, and the person sees in picture or word form what choices they would like to choose, for example, to do at the break or in any other area they may have choices. Some of you may work with students who have vocal output devices. These are augmentative communication devices. It could be in the form of an app on an iPad, for example, Prolo Quo to Go, or it could be in the form of an actual device like one called the LAMP, L-A-M-P, whereby the student communicates using this device. Some students use alphabet boards where they can spell out a word to communicate what they mean. And I use a whiteboard all the time in my therapy. So a whiteboard could be a big whiteboard on the wall, or it could be a small whiteboard, which again I can use to write 2 words, which might be a choice. Will we do this or will we do this? I might write a schedule, as I have on my whiteboard. I might embrace the student to assist me in writing the schedule. Let's write the 4 things we're going to do now before break. And I find a whiteboard where I can use visuals on it extremely helpful. Of course, you could do that also on a piece of paper. Signs or gestures are also very helpful to use. And the autistic student may be using LOV, which is the Irish sign language. And again, this is visual. We can see the signs being used. Our understanding and knowledge and use of the signs will be very helpful to the autistic student if they are using LOV. So again, in terms of the communication environment, it's important that we are tutored in the signs and are able to use them in support of reciprocal communication and teaching the curriculum. With students who are using language to communicate at that higher level of social thinking, we're supporting theory of mind and awareness and strategies for thinking and for feeling, and also for understanding how other people think and feel. And this is a reciprocal and social process, and I recommend that you consider looking at Michelle Garcia Winner's website, socialthinking.com, which has wonderful resources for teaching this whole area of thinking and feeling and social thinking and social communication for the autistic student. We want to really think as well about how do we arrive to the communication partner? How do we change what we do in order to ensure that the communication partner is understood, understands us, and stays in that reciprocal flow of communication. So I'm going to go through some good pointers, communicative pointers in relation to good practice between partners. And one of them is to consider our posture. Some autistic students find it a little bit challenging if we're very, very close. There's a wonderful author, Donna Williams, who sadly died a few years ago. She has written a number of books on her own lived experience of being autistic. And Donna spoke many years ago in Galway and talked about what she called exposure anxiety. And what she meant by this is that if somebody comes straight up, face to face, to speak with her, she found this very exposing. She felt a flood of anxiety when this happened. And for her, she preferred if somebody came side by side. So just be aware that posture is very important, and how you are posturally is important in terms of comfort of the autistic student. Consider your own language. For example, it's an auditory stimulus. So without the visual supports, all the other person may have is the auditory input. And once that's spoken by you and listened to by the other person, it's disappeared. So again, having a visual tool to support that may be very regulating and support language comprehension. Be conscious of your sentence length. Again, depending on the language comprehension of the autistic student, long sentences may be very difficult for them to process. So consider how long are your sentences relative to the length of sentences that they use, for example. Consider your vocabulary. Is your vocabulary at an appropriate level for the partner in communication? And also the amount of language you use. So are you using too much language for the student's level of comprehension? Sometimes I say, sprinkle no talking dust. Go nice and slow. Less is more. Because this gives the person more of a chance to process and understand all of the language that they are hearing. Imagine yourself learning a brand new language, for example, Japanese, and you arrive there, and the more people use, the more words in a sentence can be very confusing if you're a new learner to Japanese. Another thing to consider is your rate of communication. Is your pace and rate slow enough to enable language comprehension and to keep that conversation going? If your rate is too fast, the language can go over the head of the partner in communication, and they can nod but not really mean it because they didn't fully understand due to the pace. Also be aware that you hold great capacity for meaning in your language when you use stress and intonation. So use appropriate intonation, appropriate rhythm and stress in your voice, which really can enhance the meaning. And we've spoken a lot about using visuals in the environment. That includes your facial expression. So for example, use your facial expression richly. Make sure it's appropriate for the context of communication. Use gesture well. So again, each of our gestures that we use give meaning. So be conscious of your gesture and how you're enhancing the words you use with gestures. Giving attention is one of the biggest pieces. Listening carefully and gaining the attention of the other. So that's back to regulation, ensuring that the person is comfortable, calm, has sensory strategies to support, has visual strategies, and then gaining attention for language reciprocity and learning. Also, it's really important when we use language with our partner in communication that we give adequate response time. So do I have enough time to give to the communicative process? Ask yourself, have I stopped, waited for 10 seconds, and listening to the response? We often rush in very quickly, having asked a question or made a suggestion before the person has time to process, consider, and execute a response. Also, do consider conferring with family, those closest to the student. They may also offer important information about the student's preferences, sensory processing challenges, sensory preferences, and language and communication skills. 3 websites I want to finish with. One is by a lady called Paula Kluth, Kluth, and this is paulatluth.com. She's written a wonderful book, You're Going to Love This Kid. And this book, as well as all of her website, is very much about inclusion, how to create inclusive classrooms. She has a recent one on her website called All In, and this is 18 ways to create inclusive virtual classrooms for students who will be needing support. The NCSE is a website for teachers, which I'm sure you will know about. That's ncse.ie. They provide a lot of specialist courses in the area of autism in support of teachers. And the last website is Middletown Centre for Autism. This is Middletown, middletownautism.com is this website. Again, they have enormous amounts of resources, webinars, literature, evidence-based researched articles available on their website, and a number of trainings also. So I wish you all the best, and may these resources support your own expertise, which you already have. Bye bye.